The hammer of dawn asterisk asterisk. My world, at 5:03 a.m. on a Tuesday, was a very specific kind of dark. It wasn't the peaceful, starry dark of midnight. It was the heavy, suffocating dark that comes right before the alarm clock screams. The dark that smells like stale coffee and regret for not going to bed earlier. I was deep in a dream about trying to fax a bagel to my boss when the sound started. Asterisk tap. Tap tap tap. Asterisk. It wasn't loud, but in the absolute silence of my apartment, it was as sharp and out of place as a gunshot. My eyes snapped open. My heart was already doing a nervous little jitterbug against my ribs. I lay there, frozen, listening. The digital clock on my nightstand burned red numbers into the gloom. 5:04 a.m. Asterisk tap. 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 Tap asterisk. This wasn't the radiator acting up. It wasn't a branch against the window. This was a pattern. This was intentional. Someone was at my door. My first thought, the logical one, was fire. I sniffed the air. No smoke. My second thought, the paranoid one born from too many late-night true crime documentaries, was axe murderer. I strained my ears for the sound of screaming or police sirens. Nothing. Just the hum of my refrigerator and that infuriating, persistent tapping. I swung my legs out of bed. The floor was cold. I pulled on the pair of jeans I discarded on the floor the night before and stumbled out of my bedroom, through the tiny living room, towards my front door. I didn't turn on any lights. The peephole was a fisheye lens into the dimly lit hallway of my apartment building. And there he was, Mr. Gable. Mr. Gable was my next-door neighbor. He was a man in his late 70s, a retired something or other. He was the kind of guy who had a routine so solid you could set your watch by it. Every morning at 7:15, he'd go for a walk. Every afternoon at 3 o'clock, he'd sit on the bench out front and read the newspaper. He was quiet, polite, and kept to himself. We weren't friends. Our entire relationship was a series of nods in the hallway and the occasional, "Mailman's late again." But the man in my peephole at 5:05 a.m. was not the Mr. Gable I knew. This Mr. Gable looked like he'd been stuffed into his clothes by force. His usually neat white hair was sticking up in tufts. He was wearing a plaid bathrobe over striped pajamas, and on his feet were a pair of worn-out leather slippers. His face, normally a placid mask of retirement, was pale and tight with something I couldn't quite place. Fear. Urgency. Both. He raised his hand to knock again. I undid the deadbolt and the chain, the sounds unnaturally loud in the quiet. I opened the door just a crack, the security chain still engaged. "Mr. Gable?" I said, my voice a gravelly croak. "Is everything okay? It's really early." His eyes, a watery blue, locked onto mine. They were wide, intensely focused. He didn't apologize. He didn't say good morning. He leaned in close to the crack in the door, so close I could smell the faint scent of peppermint on his breath. "Leo," he said. My name. He'd never used my name before. "Don't go to work today." I blinked. I must have heard him wrong. The fax the bagel dream was still clinging to the edges of my consciousness. "I'm sorry, what?" "Don't go to work," he repeated, each word slow and deliberate, like he was driving a nail into wood. "Just call in. Tell them you're sick. Tell them your pipes burst. I don't care what you tell them. Just don't leave this building." I stared at him. My sleep-addled brain was trying to catch up. "Mr. Gable, I can't just not go to work. I have a presentation at 9:30. My boss will have my head. What's this about? Is there something wrong with the building?" He shook his head, a sharp, frustrated movement. "It's not the building. Just trust me. Please. For once in your life, just trust an old man who has nothing better to do than watch the world go by." The "for once in your life" part stung a little. It felt personal, like he knew about my habit of overthinking everything, of needing a 5-point plan for a trip to the grocery store. "Trust you on what?" I asked, my voice rising with a mix of confusion and annoyance. "You have to give me something more than that. Is there a gas leak? A police situation?" He hesitated. His eyes darted down the empty hallway and then back to me. I saw a war happening behind him. He wanted to tell me more, but something was stopping him. "I can't explain," he whispered. and he genuinely looked pained. It would sound crazy. Just stay home. Stay inside. By noon, you'll understand. I promise you. By noon, it will all make sense. By noon? What happens at noon? Just do it, Leo. His tone was final, almost pleading. He looked so old and fragile standing there in his mismatched pajamas. Then, without another word, he turned and shuffled back to his own apartment. I heard his door open and close with a soft, definitive click. I stood there in the dark, with my door open just a crack, staring at the empty spot where he had been. The whole interaction had lasted less than a minute, but it felt like I'd fallen into a different dimension. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood. My heart was still pounding. What the actual hell? I said to my empty apartment. The next 2 hours were a psychological battlefield. My routine was my armor. Shower, shave, the same brand of oatmeal every morning, the same 10-minute window to catch the 7:22 bus. It was boring, but it was safe. It kept the chaos of the world at bay. Mr. Gable had just thrown a grenade into the middle of my safe, boring life. I went through the motions on autopilot. I took a shower. The hot water did nothing to clear the confusion. I stood in front of my closet, staring at my row of nearly identical blue and white shirts. Should I go? Of course I should go. The presentation was for the Henderson account. It was a big deal. Sarah, my boss, had been prepping for it for weeks. If I didn't show up, it wouldn't just be an absence. It would be a betrayal. It would be career suicide. I could picture the look of cold fury on her face. I could hear the disappointed sighs from my colleagues. Mr. Gable was a nice old man, but he was old. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he'd had a bad dream and gotten his days mixed up. Maybe this was the beginning of something sadder, like dementia. The thought made me feel a pang of sympathy, followed immediately by a surge of irritation. He couldn't just drop a bomb like that and walk away. I made coffee. The bitter smell usually centered me. Not today. I sat down at my small kitchen table, my laptop open. The cursor blinked in the field of a new email. All I had to do was type Sarah, write a simple lie, and hit send. Asterisk food poisoning. Sudden fever. Sorry, asterisk. My finger hovered over the keyboard. But what if he's right? Right about what? That was the infuriating part. He gave me nothing. It was like being told to avoid a pothole, but not being told which street it was on. I thought about Mr. Gable's eyes. That wasn't the look of a confused old man. That was the look of someone who had seen a ghost. That was certainty. A grim, terrifying certainty. I got up and paced my small living room. I walked to the window and peered out through the blinds. The world outside looked perfectly normal. The streetlights were still on, casting an orange glow on the quiet street. A garbage truck rumbled in the distance. A few early runners were out, their breath making little puffs in the chilly morning air. It was just a normal Tuesday. My phone buzzed. A text from Dave, my coworker and cubicle mate. Asterisk, you ready to get Henderson today? Don't be late. Sarah's already here, and she looks like she chewed on a lemon. Asterisk. My stomach twisted. This was it. The point of no return. I had to leave in 15 minutes to make the bus. I went back to the laptop. My rational mind, the part that paid bills and worried about 401(k)s, was screaming at me. Asterisk, this is insane. You're going to throw away professional credibility because your eccentric neighbor had a bad dream? Grow up, Leo. Asterisk, but a smaller, quieter voice, the one I usually ignored, the one that felt instincts in my gut instead of facts in my head, was whispering. Asterisk, he said, just trust me. He looked scared. What do you have to lose? One sick day. Asterisk. The war raged. I thought about every movie I'd ever seen where the hero ignores the warning and ends up in a world of trouble. I thought about every time I'd played it safe and regretted it. With a groan of frustration, I slammed my laptop shut. I wouldn't email. I wouldn't call. I'd just go. I had to go. This was ridiculous. I put on my shoes, grabbed my jacket and my bag. I walked to the door, my hand on the knob. I could feel my pulse in my throat. And I stopped. I saw his face again. The pale, tight skin. The desperate blue eyes. Asterisk, for once in your life, Just trust an old man. Asterisk. Damn it, Gable, I muttered. I took my hand off the doorknob. I took off my jacket. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling slightly, and I called the office. Hey, Sarah? Yeah, hi. It's Leo. I tried to sound weak. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I woke up with this thing. I think it's food poisoning. Yeah, really bad. I don't think I can make it in today. I listened to her cold, clipped disappointment. I know. I'm so sorry about the presentation. Yeah, Dave has my notes. Okay. Thanks. Bye. I hung up. A wave of nausea washed over me. But it wasn't from a fictional illness. It was from the sheer, terrifying act of breaking my routine. I had just jumped off a cliff based on a feeling and the word of a man who wore slippers to deliver apocalyptic warnings. It was 7:25 a.m. My bus was pulling away without me. There was no going back now. The first hour was the worst. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I was supposed to be in a conference room right now, setting up a PowerPoint slide deck. Instead, I was in my sweatpants, staring at the wall. I felt like a criminal. Every time a car passed by on the street below, I flinched, half expecting it to be Sarah coming to check if I was really sick. I was a terrible liar. I always had been. I tried to distract myself. I turned on the TV. A perky morning show was on, talking about a new celebrity diet and the weather. Another beautiful, sunny day ahead, the weatherman chirped. I changed the channel. News. A political scandal, a sports recap, a feel-good story about a lost dog being found. The world was spinning along, perfectly normally. I felt like an idiot. I thought about knocking on Mr. Gable's door and demanding an explanation. But something stopped me. He'd said I'd understand by noon. I had to see this through. I had to know if I was a fool or not. I did some chores. I cleaned my kitchen, which was already pretty clean. I reorganized my bookshelf by color, which I'd been meaning to do for years. It killed 20 minutes. I tried to work from home, but I couldn't focus. My mind was a pinball machine of anxiety and curiosity. What could possibly happen that would make skipping work the right decision? A terrorist attack. That seemed wildly dramatic and unlikely. A massive traffic jam. I'd sat in plenty of those. They were annoying, not life-altering. Maybe it was something personal. Maybe Mr. Gable knew my company was going to announce layoffs today. But how would he know that? He was a retired man who read paper newspapers and fed pigeons. I looked out the window again. The sun was higher now. People were out and about. A mom was pushing a stroller. A mailman was doing his rounds. Everything was infuriatingly normal. By 10 a.m., the anxiety had morphed into a solid, heavy lump of regret in my stomach. I had made a huge mistake. I had let a moment of irrational fear override a decade of professional responsibility. I started drafting a follow-up email to Sarah in my head, explaining that I was feeling much better and could maybe come in after lunch. But then I remembered Mr. Gable's voice. Asterisk by noon, you'll understand. Asterisk. Noon. Just 2 more hours. I could wait 2 more hours. I made another pot of coffee. I scrolled mindlessly through social media. I saw a post from Dave, a photo from the conference room. Asterisk Henderson presentation in full swing. Wish us luck. Asterisk the lump in my stomach grew heavier. I should have been in that photo. 11 a.m. 1 more hour. The suspense was a physical ache. I was a coiled spring. I couldn't sit still. I paced from the living room to the kitchen and back again, a prisoner in my own home. 11:30 a.m. I was staring at the clock on my microwave, watching the numbers change with glacial slowness. 11:31, 11:32. This was torture. Whatever was going to happen, I just wanted it to happen. I wanted to be vindicated, or I wanted to be proven a fool. I just needed to know. At 11:55 a.m., my phone vibrated. It was a news alert. I usually ignored them, but this one had a headline that made my blood run cold. Breaking. Major explosion and fire reported at Cumberland Industrial Park. I fumbled with my phone, my fingers suddenly numb. I tapped the notification. The screen loaded a live news video. There was a female reporter in a bright yellow jacket, standing in front of a chaotic scene. Thick, black smoke billowed into the sky behind her. Flashes of red and blue from emergency vehicles lit up her face. My heart stopped. The Cumberland Industrial Park. That was where my office was. That was where the Henderson presentation was happening. I turned up the volume, my hands shaking. Absolute chaos here, Maria, the reporter was saying, shouting to be heard over the sirens. We're getting reports that it started at a chemical storage facility, but the fire has spread to several adjacent buildings. The initial explosion was felt for miles around. We're hearing there may be casualties. Police and fire crews are establishing a massive perimeter. They're urging everyone to stay away from the entire area. The camera panned across the scene. It was a nightmare. One building was just a skeleton of twisted metal, engulfed in flames. The building next to it, the one I recognized instantly, the one with the blue-tinted windows, was my office building. The side facing the explosion was scorched and shattered. Deb littered the parking lot. I couldn't breathe. That was my desk, behind those broken windows. That was the conference room where Sarah, Dave, and the rest of my team were right now. The reporter continued. The timing of the initial explosion is now being confirmed for around 9:28 a.m. The presentation was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. We would have all been in that glass-walled conference room on the east side of the building, the side that faced the chemical facility. We would have been just getting settled, pouring water, making small talk. We would have been right in the path of the blast. If I had gone to work, if I had caught my bus, if I had ignored Mr. Gable's frantic 5 a.m. knocking, I would have been there. A cold, sickening wave of understanding washed over me. It was so powerful my knees buckled, and I had to sit down on the floor right there in the middle of my living room. By noon, I understood why. The words echoed in my head, no longer a cryptic warning, but a statement of horrific, terrifying fact. Mr. Gable hadn't just saved me from a bad day. He hadn't just saved me from a traffic jam or a lecture from my boss. He had saved my life. The sounds from the TV faded into a dull roar. I saw the reporter's mouth moving, but I couldn't hear the words. All I could see was the image of that burning building, the building that should have been my tomb. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor. It could have been 2 minutes or 20. I was numb. The weight of what had almost happened, of the razor-thin margin between my life and my death, was crushing me. My phone started ringing. It was my mom. Then my sister. Then Dave's number flashed on the screen. He must have gotten out. A sob caught in my throat. Relief, terror, and a profound, universe-shattering gratitude all mixed together. I finally managed to stand up, my legs weak. I walked to my front door, my body moving on autopilot. I unlocked it and stepped out into the hallway. I walked the 3 steps to Mr. Gable's door. I didn't knock. I just stood there, staring at the dark, polished wood. My mind was racing, trying to put the pieces together. How could he have known? It wasn't a guess. It wasn't a lucky hunch. He knew. He knew with a certainty that got him out of bed at 5 a.m. to warn a near stranger. I raised my hand to knock, but again I hesitated. What would I even say? Thank you for saving my life. The words felt too small, too inadequate for the debt I now owed. As I stood there, I heard a faint sound from inside his apartment. It was a slow, sad, beautiful sound. It was the sound of a jazz trumpet, a lonely, melancholic melody that drifted through the door and filled the silent hallway. It was a sound of grief, of memory, of things lost and remembered. I lowered my hand. I didn't knock. He had given me my life back today. The least I could do was give him his peace. I went back into my apartment and closed the door softly behind me. The news was still playing, but I turned it off. The silence returned, but it was a different silence now. It wasn't anxious or empty. It was full. It was the silence of a second chance. The days that followed were a blur. The news was dominated by the explosion. The death toll was low, thankfully, but every name they read was a punch to the gut. They were people I knew, people I'd shared a coffee machine with. Sarah, my boss, was in the hospital with serious burns. Dave had a broken arm and a concussion from being thrown from his chair. Everyone in that conference room was injured, some critically. My food poisoning was seen as a miraculous stroke of luck. Everyone told me how lucky I was. I just nodded. It wasn't luck. It was Mr. Gable. I went back to my routine, but it felt different. The armor was gone. I saw the world with new eyes. The coffee tasted richer. The sun felt warmer. The boring, predictable pattern of my life felt like a precious gift. I had stared into the abyss of a random, violent death and had been pulled back at the last second. But the question of how hung over everything. It was a ghost in my apartment, following me from room to room. I tried to talk to him a few times. I saw him on his bench at 3 p.m., reading his newspaper as always. He looked the same as he always had, calm, composed, a little distant. "Mr. Gable," I said, sitting down next to him. "About what happened. I don't know how to thank you." He didn't look up from his paper. "No thanks necessary, Leo." "But how did you know?" He turned a page slowly. The paper rustled. "I didn't know anything for certain," he said, his voice even. "I just had a feeling. A bad feeling. Sometimes you should listen to those." It was a brush-off. A polite, firm, final brush-off. He wasn't going to tell me. I did some digging of my own. It felt wrong, invasive, but I had to know. I searched through old local news archives online. I typed in Gable and explosion and industrial park. I didn't find anything. Then, on a hunch, I searched for Gable and accident and a date from about 40 years ago. It took a while, but I found it. A small article, a single column on page 6 of a digital archive of our local paper. Factory foreman killed in unexplained blast. The article was brief. There had been an explosion at a manufacturing plant. One man had been killed. The man's name was Arthur Gable. He was 38 years old. He was survived by a wife and a young son. The son's name was Charles. Charles Gable. My Mr. Gable. The article mentioned that Charles Gable, then a boy of about 10, had been supposed to visit his father at the plant that day after school. A last-minute dentist appointment had kept him away. I leaned back from my computer screen, the pieces clicking into place with a terrible, heartbreaking finality. He hadn't had a vision. He hadn't read a secret government report. He had lived this before. A father, a plant, an explosion, a son saved by a random, last-minute change of plans. The trauma of that day, the ghost of his father, had lived inside him for decades. And on that Tuesday morning, something, a sound, a smell, a dream, a pattern in the news he read so diligently, had triggered that old, deep-seated fear. The stars had aligned in the worst way, and his subconscious, the part of him that was still that 10-year-old boy who lost his dad, had screamed a warning. It was a warning he couldn't ignore, a warning he couldn't explain logically, because it wasn't logical. It was the echo of a past tragedy, a desperate attempt to prevent history from repeating itself. He hadn't been trying to save me, not really. He had been trying to save that 10-year-old boy all over again. I never asked him about it again. Some truths are too heavy to speak out loud. We still aren't friends, Mr. Gable and I. We still just nod in the hallway. But something fundamental has changed between us. The nods are slower now. They hold a universe of unspoken understanding. Sometimes, I buy an extra apple at the grocery store and leave it on his doorstep. Sometimes, he brings my trash cans back up from the curb. He gave me my life, and in doing so, he maybe, just a little bit, made peace with his own past. So, if you ever get a strange feeling, a knock on the door at an odd hour, a warning from a voice you barely know, don't be so quick to dismiss it. The universe works in mysterious ways. Sometimes it sends a message, and sometimes that message is delivered by an old man in slippers, carrying the weight of an old sorrow, offering you a gift you won't understand until noon.